Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emily the Cat Lady, and you join me here in Underworld in Fallout 3, which is inside the Museum of History. So, next to the Washington Monument and Museum of Technology and all that fun stuff. For the next part of my Science of Fallout ongoing series, where we're going to talk about the human-ish mutations that have come about, because there's quite a few of them. It's not just ghouls, there's a few other kind of aspects and different things that have happened in different locations. So I think it's quite an interesting topic to really dig into the science and the effects of radiation and mutations and how that all impacts things. We did talk about ghouls in the immortality series, but that was more about the kind of prolonged lifespan stuff, whereas today we're going to talk about how ghouls came about, what they are from a scientific point of view, and also what it is that basically makes them turn feral. Ghouls have featured in every game in the Fallout series as well as in the TV series. And you can even play as a ghoul in a couple of games, including, I believe, Fallout 76 now. And they are considered a mutant. They're a mutated human that's been exposed to massive amounts of radiation, and instead of being killed by the rads, they have mutated to become resistant to radiation, and there's physical and physiological changes as well, and they are functionally immortal, but not... they can be killed. They can be killed, but they won't necessarily die of old age. So the first thing really is that we want to talk a bit about the definitions. So I have acquired some diagrams for you to see exactly what we're talking about when we talk about mutations. So these definitions come from kind of biology, biochemistry and physics. So lock in for some science, which, as you've probably gathered by now, is my favourite subject. So we'll come into the chop shop here because I think it's a good setting for this conversation. So what do we actually mean when we say mutation? So mutation is an error in a DNA sequence that is introduced during mitosis, which is cell division, or meiosis, which is cell splitting, which is like gamete formation, for instance. So when eggs or sperm are created, it's meiosis, because in mitosis the entire genome is copied so that each cell has a full complement of the genetic material, while meiosis, the genes are divided in two. So basically, instead of having a pair of each chromosome, each resultant cell has one of the two chromosomes for each of the chromosomes in the genome. So that's kind of the difference between them. But it can also happen due to damage to the DNA. So DNA is a molecule that's formed of a double helix with paired up nucleotides. So you've got cytosine, guanine, adenine or thymine, which are designated with the initials CGAT. And it's made up of these base pairs, and the sequences of these base pairs is basically encodes genes which contain instructions to make a specific protein, whether it's a hormone or whether it's a component of certain tissues. That's all those instructions are contained, and it's the sequence of these base pairs is what kind of encodes that protein. But 98% of the human DNA is non-coding, which means it doesn't code for any proteins. So the areas that do code for proteins are called exons, and they make up all the genes that create everything: hair colour, eye colour, hormones, hemoglobin, biological sex, all that kind of stuff. And a fun fact that's kind of not massively relevant, at least I don't think it's that relevant, but it's interesting, because everybody knows that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Everybody knows that. It's quite cliche at this point. But what a lot of people don't know is that mitochondria actually contain their own DNA, which is inherited through the matriarchal line. So you inherit your mitochondria from your mother, because they're contained in the egg cell. Sperm doesn't have mitochondria, so that's an interesting thing. And the theory behind that is that the mitochondria were actually at one point bacteria or some other kind of single-celled organism that kind of moved into living cells and just decided to stay there. And that's why it has its own little genome. Quite an interesting tangent there. But some of the non-coding DNA does have other functions, like the telomeres, which are at the end of the chromosomes, that impact lifespan, because as the chromosomes are copied for mitosis, every time a little bit of the telomeres are lost, which means that the cells will eventually reach a point where they can't divide anymore, and then they will live out their lifespan, and that'll be that, which is what we talked about when we were talking about the immortality stuff. That enzymes that repair the telomeres, called telomerase, can prevent that process. But mutations can occur in a number of different ways. So we can have duplication, deletion, inversion, insertion, translocation, substitution. Large parts of a chromosome could be changed, or it could be as simple as one single nucleotide, one single base pair that has been changed. And not all mutations are harmful. A lot of them are inconsequential, especially if they affect what they call the junk DNA, which is stretches of DNA that doesn't really do anything, or at least it doesn't seem to do anything. So if a mutation occurs there, it's probably not going to be noticeable, because you wouldn't have any changes in the organism to look for it. So it kind of happens. But some mutations can even be beneficial, and this is kind of the principle behind natural selection and evolution. Bear in mind that the theory of evolution is called the theory in science because it has a lot of evidence behind it. And people, I think, don't quite grasp the time frame that evolution happens over, because it's not something that happens in the space of a couple of generations. It takes thousands and thousands and thousands of years for changes to become apparent. The dinosaurs and things, again, we're talking millions of years, and it's hard to really grasp that kind of time scale when our lifespan is like 80 years, But living things can then develop a mutation that helps them survive and reproduce better. So because they have a better chance of reproducing, they pass that trait on to their offspring, and then it does eventually become an integral feature of the species if it's beneficial. And the other thing to note is that your DNA is getting damaged all the time. Inside your body right now, as you're listening to my voice, DNA and probably several of the trillions of cells in your body has been damaged. DNA replication isn't perfect, errors happen, and we will get back to the external sources of mutations, but it's happening pretty much all the time. But just like all things in physiology, the body has ways of fixing these problems and protecting you from these things. It has redundancy in a lot of body systems, and it has the ability to repair DNA and to fix it. So just like if you have cancer cells, your body will end up with cancer cells that could become cancerous all the time, but the immune system destroys them. It recognises that they're abnormal and uses NK, natural killer cells, and tumour necrosis factor to destroy them before they become a problem. And inside the cells, the same kind of thing happens. If there's a mistake in DNA, it can be repaired by enzymes and chemical corrections, and that happens all the time too, which is kind of weird to think about, because cancer develops when these cancerous cells manage to not be stopped by the immune system, and then you go on to develop cancer from that. So that it's something that, there's potential cancer in your body all the time, which is kind of scary to think about. But your body does try, and it does have ways of preventing these things from happening and protecting you from these kinds of mutations. But biology is never simple, ever. There's no hard and fast rules in biology. There's always exceptions. Nothing is as straight and simple as people would probably like it to be. So when DNA is damaged and repaired, the repair can introduce errors too. That happens, same as if you're working on, say, a Word document, and if you move a picture one pixel too far and then everything ends up all over the place. These things can happen in DNA as well, and result in more mutations. Like, making an entire multicellular organism function is complicated beyond measure, and spontaneous mutations happen Spontaneous in biological terms doesn't mean for fun. What we mean by spontaneous is that it happens randomly for no reason. So there's no cause, there's no there's no obvious underlying. It just happens because it does. But mutations can also be induced by mutagens. So mutagens are anything, any substance or anything that alters or damages the genetic material and increases the mutation rate. So many mutagens are also carcinogens, but not all of them. So carcinogens are things that cause cancer or increase your risk of cancer. Mutagens cause mutations or increase your risk of mutations. Some things can be both. Mutations can cause cancer to develop, and one of the kind of best well-documented ones we have is that the effect of UV light from the sun on the skin, which induces skin cancer. But not all mutagens cause cancer. There's so many of them. You've got your free radicals, you've got deaminating agents that convert cytosine, which is one of the nucleotides in DNA, to uracil, which is a nucleotide that's normally only found in RNA, which is what is used to duplicate the DNA. Alkylating agents like mustard gas. So yeah, even if you survive a mustard gas attack, it could still be potentially really harmful. And of course, the one that we're the most interested in here is ionizing radiation. So not all radiation is ionizing. Radio waves are technically radiation, but they don't cause ionization. So ionizing radiation causes atoms or molecules to lose electrons and become ions, which is kind of obvious if you're familiar with that concept from chemistry and physics. But high energy is needed to do that, to overcome the normal forces that keep the electrons bound to their nuclei. So we are talking about higher energy radiation, so gamma rays, X-rays, and the higher end of the ultraviolet spectrum. Subatomic particles can be energetic enough as well, which is where alpha and beta radiation come from and come under this category. So, radioactive decay, unsurprisingly, causes radiation, alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. This radiation can come from nuclear reactions such as fission or fusion, and of course the atomic bombs. So that is fun. So alpha particles are helium nuclei, and they are blocked by paper. So on the whole, they're not really a huge issue unless you have direct skin contact with the particles. Then they can cause damage, but because of the size, they're not going to penetrate very far into tissues or anything like that. Beta radiation is electrons and can be blocked by a sheet of aluminium, so you do need metal essentially to block beta radiation. And again, it can be a problem if you get direct contact onto your skin, but beta particles can't really get through your skin barrier and cause havoc inside your body. So put the tinfoil away. The one that we care most about here is the gamma radiation, because it is a wave rather than a particle, and it has the capacity to penetrate really dense material, and that means that it can pass through your skin into your tissues inside your body, and it can have an impact on any part of your body because it can get through that. So in order to protect yourself against it, you need really dense material, like really thick layers of material or lead to block gamma radiation. So it's radiated photons, which means it's a particle and a wave, but it can get into the body and it causes cellular damage and it slows the repair of DNA after low dose exposure. So damage can then accumulate with long-term low-dose exposure, which is why there are maximum dosage limits in place for people that work with ionizing radiation, like nuclear engineers or radiographers. And if you want a sad story that proves why this is important, look up the Radium Girls from the 1920s, whose awful situation eventually pushed for better health and safety and working conditions because of what happened to them. I did also mention it in my first science video way back, which quality isn't as good, but I talked about the Radium Girls. Essentially, they were painting the glow-in-the-dark paint on clock faces, on watch faces, and they were encouraged to paint, like to use their mouth and their tongue to make a nice fine point on the paintbrush, and were told that the radium was perfectly safe. And then they all started getting horrendous problems with cancer and jaws falling off, and it's a really horrible story, but I think it's a very interesting one, because it proves that, you know, chronic exposure to radioactive materials like that can be very dangerous, so protection is needed. And of course, on your Pip-Boy, you've got your Geiger counter, because you can't see radiation, you can't hear gamma radiation, you can't, you can't feel it. You don't know it's there unless you have something that can specifically detect it, which would be your Geiger counter. And in this game, it's measured in rads, which is an older unit that's still used by the US, because I know in the States they like to have their own units of measurement for things. But rads have largely been superseded by the Gray and the International System of Units. And these units are measuring the dosage of ionising radiation. So 1 rad is equivalent to 0.01 grays. So at least the math is easy. So I've got 130 rads, which would be 1.3 grays at the moment, if my math is correct, but I'm not quite as good at mental arithmetic as I used to be. And there are standardised numbers of rads that are considered correlated with specific effects on someone. So less than 100 rads will show changes on blood tests, so your cell counts, but there's not going to be any symptoms. 100 to 200 rads will show acute radiation syndrome, but it's rarely fatal at that level. If you take 200 to 1,000 rads in a few hours, you've got a very serious illness and a poor prognosis at the higher end of that range, which means you're likely to die. And anything over 1,000 rads is always fatal, and that is the hard limit that the game portrays, and also the stage of your advancing radiation. You know, the effects that you do see are actually kind of fairly realistic to what you would expect. But 1,000 is the hard limit in the game, so if you take 1,000 rads, you're dead. And in real life, that's also the case. So, you know, it's quite accurate there. But the other unit that's worth talking about is the sievert, which is the unit that's used to measure the potential kind of probability of health risks of ionising radiation, and it's used to monitor and limit exposure. So, you know, there's limits for the general public to be exposed, and then there's also specific limits for people that do work in contact with ionising radiation. Like myself, obviously I was a vet, so it's mainly x-rays. You know, I didn't work in a place that had a CT scanner or anything, but you know, doing x-rays, and there were occasions where I had to hold animals because it wasn't safe to sedate them for the x-rays and things. So if I had to do that, I had to gown up with lead to protect my body and to protect my thyroid and all that kind of stuff. So sieverts are what are used to monitor that and to assess the potential health issues related to being exposed to radiation. But radiation damage can accumulate in the body with chronic exposure. So I picked out a few numbers just for some fun and interest. So a banana contains 98 nanosieverts. So bananas, people talk, yeah, bananas are slightly radioactive. That is true. 98 nanosieverts. So if you try to eat enough bananas to get radiation sickness, you're going to die from hyperkalemia, which is high potassium or something like that first. So you're not going to be able to give yourself superpowers or become a ghoul by eating bananas, I'm afraid. So dental x-rays, one set of films is 5 to 10 microsieverts. And the exposure of the evacuees that lived closest to the Fukushima power plant during the accident that happened there was 68 millisieverts. Spending 6 months on the International Space Station is 80 millisieverts, because you've got that cosmic radiation. and you don't have an ozone layer to protect you. And the dose from neutron and gamma ray flash at 1.2 kilometers from ground zero of the little boy atomic bomb in Hiroshima was 5 sieverts. And bringing some harsh context to that particular number, the LD50 in 30 days for humans, which means the dose that would kill 50% of humans within 30 days, is 4 to 5 sieverts. So,
hello.
You can you can kind of assess the impact that these bombs had during that time in our history. But we are exposed to natural kind of background radiation all the time. The average is about 2.4 millisieverts per year. So it's not a lot. I mean, sure, if you eat 100,000 bananas and get a full body CT scan every day, you're going to have a problem. So don't do that. But we should talk about what body parts are affected as well, because again, that's it tells us a lot about where we're most likely to see mutations. So radiation can damage all parts of the body, but the risk is relative. So the cells that are constantly dividing and rapidly dividing are going to see more damage, and there's going to be a higher risk of mutations because the DNA is being copied all the time. Will you please stop shoving me out the way? I'm educating people about your species. So, mutations are less likely to be corrected when the DNA is being replicated more frequently, kind of like what happens if you photocopy a page and then you photocopy the photocopy and so on, and eventually, the image gets distorted because there's slight errors in how it's printed every time you photocopy it, and that's the same thing with DNA. So the areas where you've got cells that are dividing more frequently, the bone marrow, which is where your blood cells are created, so your red blood cells for carrying oxygen, your white blood cells, majority of them are created in the bone marrow, which is your immune system, and your platelets, which you need for blood clotting. So radiation can then cause what's called aplastic anemia, which means that the bone marrow just stops producing blood cells, and that leads to anemia because you have reduced oxygen carrying capacity. Red blood cells only live for about 60 days and then they die, so they don't last a long time. You're also at a higher risk of infection because your immune system's not functioning properly, you're compromised. And blood clotting disorders, which is called thrombocytopenia, it's a mouthful, and that's where bleeding can happen spontaneously. Again, you can just start bleeding. So with thrombocytopenia, you might see like random little bruises or little red spots on your skin. You could find that your gums start bleeding, that there's blood in your urine, that, that kind of thing. And it's because you've lost the ability for blood to clot. So you just bleed. And if you cut yourself, then it won't stop, and can potentially become quite serious. The next body system that is important is the gastrointestinal tract. So the lining of your intestine is being abrased. There's abrasions happening to it constantly because food is passing through and, fecal matter is passing through. So those cells that line your guts are constantly being replaced because they keep getting worn off. So radiation can cause damage there, and that can lead to sickness, vomiting, nausea, loss of appetite, other gastrointestinal symptoms, very unpleasant. And the skin and hair follicles as well. So the skin is constantly renewing itself and your hair goes through a growth cycle. So radiation can cause a lot of damage there, and that can lead to burns, open sores, and hair loss. And if you've ever had a sunburn before, that's actually a radiation burn is what a sunburn is. It's a mild radiation burn, but it's still a radiation burn. So something to bear in mind, wear your sunscreen. Take it from me. But radiation can also damage other things, like neurotransmitters within the brain. It can damage the reproductive system, which increases risk of mutations causing birth defects and also affecting fertility in general. And more mutations also increases the risk of cancer developing. So all of this is kind of encompassed in the term radiation sickness. It can be deadly, and for many people that have been exposed, it can be a slow and painful decline instead of being instantaneous. So we know a lot about how radiation attacks the body. It's been studied since 1895 when Wilhelm Röntgen started x-raying his fingers and noted the burns. He blamed ozone, but it was actually the radiation that was causing free radicals in his body. And then a lot of cases after the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were well studied, as well as after nuclear accidents like we had in Chernobyl in 1986 and Tokaimura in 1999. 1986, which was the year I was born. It's actually 39 years ago today. So, and there's a man called Albert Stevens who was a painter from Ohio, and he was exposed to the highest known accumulated radiation dose in any human. He was born in 1887 and he died in 1966. And in 1945, he was believed to have a terminal disease that was actually a gastric ulcer, not cancer. But he, as part of the Manhattan Project, yes, the Manhattan Project, that one, he was injected with a mixture of plutonium isotopes to see if it would cure his cancer that he didn't have. So he received a total dose of 64 sieverts in 20 years. I had no idea that this was an experimental treatment, and he was never even told that he actually didn't have cancer. And plutonium, like radium, accumulates in the bones, so he developed some serious degeneration in his lumbar spine and in his intervertebral discs. I always struggle with that word. It's ridiculous, especially considering that I also have a problem with those discs. And that kind of back pain is horrendous. I can speak from experience there. That's something that I've had trouble with for quite a long time. So it's not fun. And I think to talk about what we know about the ghouls, so where is he? There we go, this guy. This is Dr. Barrows. Talked about him before. He is the doctor here at Underworld that looks after all the ghouls and also non-ghouls. He will treat non-ghouls.
Yes.
But he is also making a point to study ghouls and learn what he can about their physiology and their differences and how to manage them. And he has...
It's locked for a reason.
Don't
get any ideas.
And there's supposed to be terminal entries on that computer that you can read. But they're bugged, so they don't actually appear in the game, which is kind of annoying because I think they're really quite interesting. And it's basically Dr. Barrow's observations of what he's got, because you can see we've got the two glowing ones kind of hanging out in that room, and he's watching them and making notes and things. So he is studying both the ghouls, the feral ghouls, and the glowing ones to learn more about them. But the notes that should have been on his terminal do refer to a mutation in the autonomic nervous system, which is the part of the nervous system that works on its own to manage cardiovascular function, respiratory function, and other things that we don't consciously need to think about. Also controls the fight or flight response, and it's the most primal and least reasonable part of the nervous system because it's very much has stayed pretty much the same from the kind of earliest stages of our evolution, fight or flight, escaping danger. It keeps us alive. And it's hardly changed since, the days where we were running away from dinosaurs or whatever was happening then. So Dr. Barrow states that ionizing radiation with wavelengths less than 10 picometers is responsible. So the smaller the wavelength, the higher the energy carried by the waves. So the mutation affects the neurotransmitters that control heart and lung function and cause them to regenerate continually to sustain life, but not enough to maintain skin elasticity and prevent necrosis, which is why, unfortunately, ghouls end up looking the way they do. And we don't really know what the individual factor is that causes someone to mutate into a ghoul instead of die from the rads. And the abundance of skeletons all across the wasteland proves that most people died that weren't safely ensconced in a vault or something. The majority of people actually died from the bombs, and it's only a small percentage that have gone on to become ghouls. So what happens to people that become ghouls? Well, you can see changes to the skin, their
Good to
hair.
see
So a lot of them lose hair, or at least lose some of their hair. Their skin tends to kind of look necrotic and peel off, and they also lose their nose and kind of lose their ears as well. And the reason for that is that it damages the cartilage. So the structure of your nose and the structure of your ears is mostly made up by cartilage rather than bone, which is why ghouls tend to lose those external parts, because the cartilage can't sustain itself. And it does seem to be that the change can be quite progressive, and it can happen over months or years, but it can also be quite instantaneous. For example, Moira Brown, if you decide to detonate Megaton, she seems to become a ghoul pretty much instantly. And same thing happened to Private Edwards at Camp Searchlight in Fallout New Vegas when the Legion let off that dirty bomb. Most of the other ones became feral, but he didn't, but it was pretty much an instant. So he's quite a new ghoul. But Raoul tells us about the process taking time. So does Carol, who lives here in Underworld.
Morning.
And we know that it can be kind of...
Welcome to the chop shop.
I
I'm
did not
Nurse
mean to talk
Graves,
to you.
Dr. Borrow's assistant. Don't let our place's name fool you. The doctor is very good with injuries, dismemberments, and trauma. If you require any stim packs or blood packs, let me know.
Good to know. Thank you. So yeah, the kind of process can take time, and we know it can be induced and controlled in the case of Eddie Winter, of Hancock, who took the radiation drug, and Thaddeus in the TV show, who's got the kind of regenerative capacity, but his appearance hasn't changed yet. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to him as season 2 comes around. I have actually, side note on that, I have seen that it's going to be episodes are released on a weekly basis, which is kind of old fashioned now, but you know. So I don't know if you guys would be interested in hearing my thoughts about the episodes as we get them. Can maybe record something just to chat about what I think and where the story's going to go. So if you think that's something you'd like to hear, let me know. I would be potentially interested in talking about that. Or wait until the end of the season and then having a whole chat about the storyline and stuff. I'm quite excited to see where it's going to go. But yeah, back to the ghouls here. So the mutation that they have does allow for extensive regeneration and healing capabilities, and the healing capacity is boosted when they're exposed to radiation, but not everything is healed. They're immune to radiation damage, but extensive exposure could accelerate the fertilization process. They are immune to most diseases, but not all of them. They can be affected by certain things. And there are some diseases that are seen in ghouls that seem to be kind of not unique to them, but more common. Necrosis is very common, especially in the ferals. Some of them start losing more than just their skin. Arthritis seems to be quite a common one as well. It's not clear how often this happens and if their age at the time of ghoulification has an impact on it. Raoul complains of it, but from what I gather from his backstory, it does seem to be that he was a bit older when the bombs fell, so it could be that he had some changes, but he's also been alive for a couple of 100 years, and arthritis isn't a surprise in that regard. And eye issues are very common, so cataracts and glaucoma, which is increased pressure in the eyeball, which can lead to loss of sight. And you can actually see on Nurse Graves here, you know, her eyes look quite cloudy. So there could be changes happening there, and if there's changes happening inside the eye, glaucoma or retinal degeneration, macular degeneration, that kind of thing. And it does seem to be the way feral ghouls behave, like in the subway tunnels and caves and things, is that they don't really seem to be able to see very well. They are more likely to react if they hear you, but their eyesight doesn't seem to be that good. And a lot of them, their eyes do look cloudy, like they have cataracts. So kind of explains why they're fooled by the ghoul mask, I suppose. They're also vulnerable to the modified strain of FEV that President Eden gives the Lone Wanderer to put in the purifier. It is intended to target anything that carries mutations, after all. So we can see the effect of that in Broken Steel, where this place is then chock full of sick ghouls and patients and this guy's trying to figure out what's going on, but he's kind of baffled because obviously nobody knows that you put the scary killer virus in the water. And for some reason nobody has any reason to suspect you of doing anything untoward. He thinks it's because they're not used to drinking the purified water anymore, so their bodies can't handle it, which is interesting. And they do still need to eat and drink, ghouls, but they're capable of surviving for a long period without it. But if they do have to go without food and things, it could be a potential factor for accelerating the fertilization process, as the brain starts to lose function if without fluid or nutrition of any kind. Your brain uses 20% of your oxygen supply and also uses like 20% of your energy, of your glucose, and it needs water as well. So your brain needs all these things. So without that, it could cause damage, which could accelerate the process of becoming a feral ghoul. And the other important thing physiologically is that chems have a reduced effect on ghouls or no effect on ghouls, which is why it was a ghoul that invented Ultrajet, which you find in Fallout 3, because normal jet wasn't strong enough for him. And we know that both Hancock and the ghoul partake quite a lot with no apparent ill effects. So physiologically, there's obviously quite significant changes in how they process chems and how they process different metabolites and things like that. So yeah, very, very interesting. And we can obviously we can see the damage, and these two are kind of feral, the glowing ones. So that's going to do us for today. I think, yeah. But there are quite a few things to talk about next week. So talking about some of the issues that ghouls face, their immortality, social issues, and also what happens to the feral ghouls, as well as my kind of theories and my thoughts on how they become feral, why they become feral, and whether there is anything that could be done to prevent it and what that might look like. So that's going to be the topic for next week. I say I've had to split this into 2 videos because it's a huge topic for the ghouls. There's just so much to it, and there's lots of things to talk about with their capabilities and the changes that have happened to them. So hopefully you found this interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And a wee like on the video always goes a long way. And I'll be back with some more Point Lookout on Tuesday, so hopefully you'll come back for that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, or if there is any questions or anything that you want clarity on, let me know. And let me know if you want to hear from me about season 2 of the TV show when that arrives, which is 11 days. So very, very excited for that. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.